We'll go ahead and begin. Call this meeting together. I appreciate everyone's patience. We have several bills, but we're going to try to move as quickly as possible for the sake of time. Some of us have other places to be at 4:30, so therefore we're going to try to get as much done as we can here today. To begin, I'll just go ahead and ask Senator Parent if she'll lead us in a word of prayer.
Sure. If you'll bow your heads with me. Dear Lord, please watch over us and grant us the wisdom and guidance to follow your will and do our best to ensure the bright future that we all want for all of the residents of Georgia. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So here we, today we're going to hear Senate Bill 47 from Senator Gooch. And we'll begin with that one, but since you're going to have the floor, I'll just go ahead and after we get through Senate Bill 47, we'll move on to Senate Bill 159, and you can go ahead and present that one as well. So Senator Gooch, Senate Bill 47, that is the special Georgia Special Needs Scholarship Act. Yes, you may go ahead and present your bill, sir.
Not sure if the mic's on or not. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate you allowing us to hear this bill last week. We had a pretty long discussion and debate over the issues in the bill. I would call your attention to the substitute that's before you today. It's LC 490442S. And there are a couple of changes to the bill from last week's changes, but they were basically deletes. We deleted portions of the language dealing with the funding and the periodic times when that funding would be allowed. So under the original bill, it was lines 123. We struck the word monthly and inserted periodic. So you'll see periodic on line 123. And then there's a little change in that the rest of that line in lines 123 and 124. Another removal that we took out of the original bill was under section 3 of the original bill, which was lines 164 and 165. We struck that out. That dealt also with the funding when the schools would get their funding, when the scholarships would be issued. So that was language that the special needs scholarship folks wanted, but we could not come up with a good compromise working with the budget office and the lieutenant governor's office, so we decided to make those changes to keep the bill moving in a friendlier manner. I'll just remind you of the bill and basically the background of the bill. It deals with the special needs scholarship that is currently in law, that is offered to approximately 200,000 students who are under an IEP. This bill does not change that provisions of the law, but it simply adds students who are under a Section 504 plan, which currently we're told there's approximately 58,000 students in Georgia's public schools. Out of 1.7 million public school students, approximately 58,000 are under a Section 504 plan. This bill would allow the parents of those students to utilize this special needs scholarship. And I know there was a lot of discussion last week about the impact it would have fiscally to the state budget. But I would remind you that this program under the IEP program has been in effect for just over 14 years. And just over 14 years, out of 200,000 eligible students, only about 2 to 3% of those kids are utilizing that program. So there's roughly 5,000 students that are currently utilizing this scholarship program with a population of 200,000 that are eligible. So that's roughly 2%. So the concern that was brought up last week about what the additional impact would be to this change in the law, we believe is insignificant. If you have 58,000 new students that could be eligible, only 2% to 3% are currently using the IEP. We believe this could have a very small impact to the fiscal impact of the state budget, roughly 1,000 to 2,000 students initially. The IEP has been in effect for 14 years. This would be a brand new program, so we don't think that there is a significant dollar amount to that. So we hope that satisfies the concerns of the education folks in the room today. So those are the changes to the bill. If you want to know, again, if you want to go back and look at what diagnoses are eligible, you can see that on page 5 of the new bill, and that's on lines 93 through 120. And those are the conditions that would qualify. You have things such as autism, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, bipolar disorder, cancer, the list goes on and on. So instead of me reading those word for word, I'm sure you can glance over those and look at them yourself. None of that has changed from last week. And so at this time, I will stop and see if there are any questions from the committee.
Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. I think we talked about this last time, but I just wanted to clarify. I'm still just not really understanding the comparison to the existing program as far as trying to look at numbers.
Yes.
Because it's my understanding that this bill includes Section 504 plus anyone with a formal diagnosis from any licensed physician or psychologist on lines 93 and 94. So would you agree with me that's totally different than a very different thing than what we have right now as it relates to requiring an IEP, which is a formal process, rather than this sort of much more informal anyone with a diagnosis?
The wording is on line 93, so you're correct, or a Section 504 with those conditions. So if you look at that list, I believe you would have to agree that those are situations to where a parent would have to take in what's best for the interest of their child. If the current school system is not providing the services that they believe they should be getting, then this program would allow them to take their child to another facility and help them with financial assistance.
Well, if I can ask a follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think you're correct. I'll take your point as to most of the conditions listed here, but some of them are more behavioral emotional, where it's going to be a little bit easier to, game that system. ADHD, autism, bipolar, drug or alcohol abuse, emotional or behavioral disorder. I would say that all of those are in a different category. From the dyslexia even could fall in that category. And so you're just really relying on you're basically saying, let's see, any licensed physician or psychologist. So not even a psychologist. It could be any physician. I mean, Senator, I think we've all seen diagnoses be a little easy to come by over the course of our lives from physicians, and I just want to point out, I just don't think that we have much basis to draw parallels on the numbers that might take advantage when this is such a different system with such a different ability to qualify for this versus what we have in law right now.
Let me say this, Senator. I'm not sure what criteria you and your husband used when you decided to take your children out of the public schools and put them in a private school. But as a parent of a child who has ADD, we didn't game the system. We struggled as a parent from first grade through pretty much through 12th grade. He's a senior this year, and this was a very stressful situation that the families are put in. And the last thing I would want to do as a parent is to take my child away from the community school that he grew up in around his friends and his peers and put him in a school maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away. It's a big burden for the parents to have to transport the kids, put them in a new school, plus come up with additional funding because a lot of these schools are more expensive than what the scholarship's going to be. And so I don't think people are looking to game the system when it comes to what's best for their child. Now, you may know people in Atlanta that do that, but where I'm from, we don't do that. We want to do what's best for the interest of our children. And I hear a lot of people say, you know, how is this going to impact the financial bottom line of the school? Well, it's going to have an impact on everyone. It impacts the parents as well. And so what we should be worried about here today is what's best for our children in Georgia and what's best for their future. And if you see someone gaming the system, I would say let's bring this bill up next year and let's correct it. Now, for the last 14 years, I haven't heard anyone in this building or around this state say that the IEP program's been abused or gamed. And so unless someone has evidence of such gaming, then I say we move on. But I think, you know, you have a valid question. I say we monitor it. I'm sure the Department of Education will let us know if this system's not working properly, and we can make changes to it in the future.
Can I ask one follow-up? So you brought up another point, which is that unfortunately, because the state stipend, or you know whatever you're going to call it, is like a certain amount, that may help some areas of the state with parents putting money in, as you suggest that you know your family has or would. But the reality is, around here, you essentially have to be a family that already has means to be able to take advantage of it. And so I have a little bit more of an ideological objection to that, because it's not going to provide that sort of hope that you are saying that you think it would for a lot of folks. And then also, along with that point, wouldn't you agree, you know, in rural Georgia, there's really not much opportunity to use this. So you said, oh, we'd have to drive 50 miles. Well, that's just not the case wouldn't you agree, with folks here in Metro Atlanta or maybe some of our other cities, which actually points out another one of the objections I have to the legislation, which is that rural Georgia, which arguably certainly would need it more, rural Georgians certainly would not be able to take advantage of this program as much. And, you know, therefore we're bleeding out money that rural Georgia needs for their kids to be educated, to give it to people in Atlanta who can afford private school. Wouldn't you agree, Senator?
Well, you made a couple points and maybe asked one question. Let me just say this. Under the current EIP program, the average scholarship is approximately $6,672 for 4,664 students. Now, there's 249 private schools in Georgia that qualify for this program, and they accept these funds. And they're not just in Atlanta. A lot of the children are going to schools inside the Metro Atlanta, which is your district, which is another reason you should support this legislation, because it does help a lot of your students that are in need and a lot of your constituents who may not have the financial means to take their children to the schools on their own totally. 18 to 20% of the schools in the state of Georgia that take this money, the tuition is at this level. And so it's not a huge expense for every school. Some students have to pay $15,000 to $20,000 per year. About 20% of these schools' tuition is roughly around $6,000 a year. So I think this program helps people in rural Georgia and the urban areas. But I have a couple of these schools in my district, and they do quite well. And I have students that go there, constituents that talk to me about it, and they're very pleased with the performance of the school. If and when they decide it's not for their kid, they take them either back to a public school or they take them to another school in the vicinity of hopefully where they live. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman? Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Senator Gooch, is there a physical note on this legislation?
There is. I believe there's one in your packet there, Senator. And, you know, once again, we don't know how many students are going to participate in this program, because the previous program that we talked about was in existence for 14 years, and it's still only 2% of the population. So I think, again, our calculation is safe to say that the dollar amount is going to be very insignificant for the future, the immediate future at least.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Gooch.
Just to point out that this in your files is actually for the previous LC on this bill. That one was LC 490328, and what we have in front of us today is LC 490442S.
Question, Mr. Chairman? And on this physical note, so it may impact 2,000 students, 10,000 students, or 25,000 students. Am I correct?
We have no idea how many people will participate. We do know there's roughly 58,000 today that's qualified under the 504 plan. If you look at the numbers from the EIP program, 2%, that is a good place to start. The 2% is after 14 years. If you tell me that 50% of these kids are going to instantly move out of a public school into a private school in the first year, then I would be willing to wager a bet on that. It's not going to happen.
Senator Gooch, one final question.
Yes, sir.
And this money will be taken out of the public school system budget?
No, sir. It'll be taken out of the general treasury of the state of Georgia, state budget, just like every other dollar that we appropriate in this budget just 2 weeks ago that you voted for. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for bringing this. I'll have a comment, then a question. When we talk about education funding, it seems to me that we get a little bit confused and that we think of this as a block funding line item, when in reality, we're funding headcount.
That's right.
And if these, so I guess this leads to my question. First of all, this fiscal note ranges from $7 million to $89 million. Isn't it true that we're going to appropriate about $10 billion to education funding here in the state of Georgia? It represents about 39% of our overall budget.
You're correct.
Follow-up question to that: whether the number is 2,000, 10,000, or 25,000, isn't it true that the expense to the state is exactly what you see on your sheet here today?
That is correct.
So, if these students stay in public school, which is what they would have to do if they could not afford to go elsewhere, what's the overall increased expense to the state? Isn't it true that it's exactly $0?
I believe you're correct. It's a zero net.
Thank you.
All right. We will go ahead and move on. We've got some people who wish to speak to the bill. I'm going to ask if you spoke to this bill previously. Just for the sake of time, just come up and please state a brief opposition or support, and let those who did not get the opportunity to speak at our last meeting have more time. So I'm going to call John Zahner of Georgia School Superintendents Association.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to briefly address some concerns. Just so you know, from perspective, I was a special ed teacher. That's how I got into education at Noonan High School. And my friend, Senator Brass, and I was soccer coach and other things, but I just wanted you to know I also was special ed director. So I have some perspective on serving students with special needs and how important that is. So I guess my biggest question, or 2 points I'd like to make, are in section 3, lines roughly 140 to 153. And I guess my question, and not necessarily that you have to answer this question, but it appears to me that the scholarship money would be used for buying, not just for services, but for buying uniforms, also participating in athletics, before and after school care, and field trips. And I will just say that my primary concern from a public school standpoint, representing superintendents, is that I would hope that we'd begin to treat the same money that we send to public schools, that we treat it the same way if we're going to send it to private schools. And that would be my comment on that. We at local schools, being a former principal as well, we would raise money through booster clubs to fund athletics. And we wouldn't have any other state funding available to us to fund athletics. But I won't get into the other issues. Obviously, before and after school care is not necessarily subsidized by state funds. In this case, this would be. So I would just call your attention to that. And my final comment is that I would hope that at some point we would treat, again, public money that we're sending to private schools the same way we treat public money that we send to public schools. And transparency is a key word. Accountability is a key word as well. And we are covered up with that in the public school setting. So I would just make those comments, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few comments with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Michael O'Sullivan of the Georgia Can.
Thank you so much. My name is Michael O'Sullivan with Georgia Can. We represent parents all throughout the state, and we come to you in support of this legislation. As the author of the bill talked about, we've had this program since 2007. It was created with the express intent of acknowledging that students who have special needs may have needs that are currently going unmet. And over the years, I think what has proven out is public school works. It works for 97% of students, and that's tremendous. You can ask just about anyone, and they will say, if you've got a special need, your public school is almost all the time going to be better. But not for everybody. For some kids out there, there's going to be a better option. That's what this program is designed to do. This bill is designed to capture all students with special needs, not just those that require services with an IEP, all students with special needs. And the list is in front of you. It's not the stubbed toe that we heard about last year. It's about autism, and ADHD, cancer. These are kids we're talking about. And so, if you vote for this bill, you are essentially empowering parents throughout the state to say, if, for whatever reason, the public school is not working the way we hoped it to, we have a better option. We can afford a better option. There are few parents out there more passionate than parents of special needs, more willing to go to the end of the world to help them. This bill helps those parents. Thank you.
Senator Parent, you had a question.
Thank you. I'd like to get your opinion on the issue just raised by the last speaker, where, actually that and then one other
Yes, ma'am.
question. And these are more specifics, not really talking about your overall sort of view towards the program, but as it relates to this legislation paying for things that public school students do not get. What's your opinion on that? And then I have one more.
The amount of money that's received, for the most part, is going to cover the amount of tuition. If there's additional fees that are charged as part of the school that might go to uniforms, that might go to field trips, to the state, it is the same. In public school, field trips are funded for the most part. For uniforms, that is part of the fees that exist. So to me, I think tuition is going to take care of most of it. If there are funds left over to go to other school needs, I don't see a concern.
Okay, and let me ask you this. Because see, the reason I asked about that is that the way I see it is like we're favoring the kids who would utilize this over the vast number that we have in public school. And so my follow-up question, that's an example of it. So my follow-up question is, do you not see a concern with the fact that we have a $400 million austerity cut right now to the public schools, not even getting into uniforms and whatnot, in an outdated formula already? I mean, how can you reconcile? You can't look at these things all separate. And so that's why I bring that up, because it's like, okay, well, I guess we clearly favor all these kids way more than we do the other millions. I mean, I just, those two things can't be totally divorced when you're talking about a limited state pot. Love your thoughts.
If you would like to change the state funding formula, I will be right there with you supporting it.
right,
I think
well,
our funding formula is outdated and could use some work to the extent that if a school is able to utilize the same amount of money that a public school ordinarily would have utilized and stretch that to have it go further, I see no problem.
Senator Sims.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to ask or reflect on the statement that was just made by the gentleman who said that public schools furnish uniforms and other needs to public school children, as well as field trips. Not so. I've paid for, out of my pocket, not my account from anybody else, out of pocket field trips. I've fed children because there was no money in those districts to take care of those children. We are in a pandemic right now, and in some of these districts, we are still trying to get Chrome books for these children. So when you make statements like that, perhaps you are speaking of the geographic region that you exist in, but when you think about it as a state matter, it is definitely not true. So I just wanted to say that, Mr. Chairman, so we can make some comparisons across the state. Thank you.
Senator Dolzal.
Can I ask a question while you're waiting? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Witt.
I was just going to remind the members of this committee, and of course the two spoke beforehand, that we're all taxpayers here. We all pay our taxes, our state income tax, our federal income tax, our local property taxes. To think that the public school system only spends this amount of money every year on their children is not true. If you add up all the other taxes that are collected through SPLOST, e-SPLOST, ad valorem, it's a lot more than this QBE number. And I think that needs to be remembered as well. These are taxpayers that we're talking about, and they're trying to educate their children to the best of their ability with the options that are given to them. So I think we should all keep that in mind as we move forward.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, dovetails well into my question for Mr. O'Sullivan. It's really a dovetail on Senator Parent's comment and question. Isn't it true that you can actually make the argument that these special needs students, the second that they were to be pulled out of the local district, because of the way the funding formula works, I feel like I keep having to kind of talk about this, 50% state, 40% local, 10% fed, roughly, it depends on where you're at, that they're actually losing half of their funding? And if we wanted to treat these students equally, the local funding would follow them and the federal funding would follow them. But in reality, what we're saying is we're going to give you 50 cents on the dollar. Good luck. And that if we really wanted to treat these students equally and recognize that, like you said, of all of the challenges that we have to educate all types of students here in the state of Georgia, I think it's probably indisputable that these groups of children come with the highest expense and the most challenge. But isn't it true that by doing this, we're giving them 50 cents on the dollar of what they would receive in the public school, and thus it gets to all the other questions we have of how are parents going to pay for it, how are they going to figure it out? But it's a little, I think it gets lost, and maybe even is not fully intellectually honoring to the numbers that we're dealing with. But you've dealt with this a lot, and I just want to clarify, unless I'm missing something here, I know you've read this bill. Is my assessment accurate here that if we wanted to, it's not that we're favoring these students, it's that we're actually saying we hope you can get by with half of what you'd get by with otherwise. And to the accountability, you mentioned the students, the parents that you know. I'm wondering if you can maybe speak to, I know that for me, nobody provides greater accountability to what my 4 children are doing than my wife and I. And I think that it really dishonors parents to say that the only way you can receive an education is that the government is looking over the shoulder of the teacher. So could you maybe speak to things that you've seen parents of special needs students engage in, maybe if they were not in the public school system?
Yeah. So to your first point, you're correct. This legislation only is the state portion of the funds. Families are still taxpayers that pay into the local share, and this bill does not collect those funds. To your second point, you're precisely right. The parents that we talk to, the parents who we meet with, they are the type who will do anything for their children and look at everything and try to find a place where they'll succeed in school, in life, in growing. That's what you do. I trust parents. I hope this committee trusts parents to make the best decision for them and ensures that funding is not what keeps them from exploring that option that could work better. That's what this bill does.
Senator Sims, did you have a question? Okay. All right, thank you. Next week, I'm gonna need help with this name, and I do apologize, I'm gonna butcher it. Sajudit from Southern Education Foundation. Could you please
Yes, sir.
state your name?
I'm Sajith Cherkamili from the Southern Education Foundation. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon on Senate Bill 47. My name is Sajith Cherkamili, and I'm the Advocacy and Government Affairs Analyst at the Southern Education Foundation here in Atlanta. I'm here today to respectfully voice my organization's opposition to Senate Bill 47, and will focus my testimony on the following topics: accessibility to scholarship funds, academic outcomes, accountability for taxpayer dollars, and federal protections for students. First, on a systemic scale, the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship provides nothing more than an illusion of choice for our state's most marginalized students and families. We can break this issue down into a few specific categories: affordability and transportation. For a low-income family who pulled their child with special needs out of her public school to accept a special needs voucher for enrolling at a private school, in that moment, the family may be thinking their child has the opportunity to receive a better education. Using their $6,000 voucher, the family begins looking for the right option. But as they're looking around, they quickly realize that tuition alone at the school they deem the best fit is $20,000 annually. Add that to the specialized services their child needs, transportation to and from school, and additional supplies that public schools would have been on the hook to legally provide, and the parents' voucher and decision to withdraw their child from her school is adding a new set of stressors and financial considerations the family would not have had to grapple with before, as Senator Gooch pointed out earlier. This low-income family, who lives in one of our state's many rural Black Belt counties, also realizes that the closest private school to their home is a 1-hour drive away. With mom and dad both working low-wage jobs with limited work hour flexibility, they are not able to take the time to drop off and pick up their child from school every day. Unlike their local public school, the private school they choose is not obligated to provide transportation for their child. None of Georgia's school choice programs require this. Where this family thought they had a choice for their child, they instead ran into another obstacle put up by a law they realize truly isn't made for them. These types of obstacles mean that the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship disproportionately provides taxpayer-funded scholarships to families that can already afford to send their child to a private school, instead of using those funds to equip our public schools with the educators and resources needed to truly provide each and every child with a free and appropriate public education. Senate Bill 47 would only exacerbate racial and socioeconomic segregation in our state's education system. Second, we don't know if this program is actually effective, so we shouldn't continue to pour money into it. In Georgia, the existing GSNS report does not meaningfully disaggregate academic performance by race, gender, or socioeconomic status. So we have no way of knowing if this program is actually helping our kids. It offers no comparison of how students performed in their public school versus how they're performing in their private school. It doesn't even require participating private schools to actually provide accommodations for students with disabilities. In other instances, limited to no evidence of effectiveness would constitute a reason for limiting or discontinuing a program. The Georgia Special Needs Scholarship should be no different. Third, the proposed legislation is redundant and funnels taxpayer dollars to unaccountable and unregulated private schools. As you know, the cost of the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship has grown by around 600% since the scholarship's passage in 2007 and implementation in 2008. In 2019, the scholarship cost the state nearly $33 million to administer, and the cost is likely to grow, up to the tune of over $50 million annually, as the scholarship's scope and scale expand. Expanding the program's eligibility to include more students, alongside 2 other voucher bills proposed by the General Assembly in this session, will surely result in the diversion of more taxpayer dollars to private schools during a time when the state is experiencing deep cuts to public education, as Senator Parent pointed out, and failing to fund public education fairly. We can and must do better for our students. Accreditation, accountability, and transparency should be a requirement, not an option, for schools accepting taxpayer dollars. Fourth, students with IEPs who receive a scholarship under the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship waive their federally guaranteed protections under IDEA. Senate Bill 47 would subject students with 504s to the same fate. Passage of Senate Bill 47 would subject students with 504s to the same waiving of their federal rights under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Existing reports for the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship do not show whether students are actually receiving their accommodations at their private school. We should invest in ensuring that public schools have the funding they need to educate each child, no matter their disability, exceptionality, or health condition. Georgia students deserve nothing less. I will end with this. The bottom line is that this program subsidizes a private education primarily for students and families who don't need tuition assistance, and it props up a program model in our state that has no proof of being effective. If students with disabilities and students with 504 plans aren't getting what they need in their public schools, which I recognize does happen very frequently, we need to look into why that's happening and fix it, not ignore the problem by setting up a parallel system of state-funded schools. More equitable pathways than the one this committee proposes are possible because vouchers do not resolve the issue that schools in our low-income communities and communities of color have been chronically underfunded. The Southern Education Foundation urges this committee to not move this bill forward and to instead fully fund public education in a way that will truly grant all students in the state the opportunity to excel and meet the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you.
Senator Brass, you had a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This low-income family, what county was this in?
It's a hypothetical situation, Senator.
Hypothetical, okay. Well, let me give you a real-life situation. And you want accountability, and you say you don't know if this program works. I encourage you to go to the Bedford School. You go down there and you look and you see these kids in that school and see what they're learning. And they tried, a lot of them did try public school, and it did not work for them. It does not work. Public school does not work for everybody. But we all agree it works for a vast majority of our kids. 97+% of our kids, it works. But there is a small fraction of kids that it does not work. In a real life situation, not a hypothetical, not one that you just made up, that you just assumed a low income family can't do the homework to know that the school is 1 hour away. And they can't do the homework to know that the tuition is going to be $20,000, and that you're assuming that they're, I don't know what you're assuming there, but it's not good. But a real life situation is a single mom who can barely afford anything, and the school is not working. Public school is not working for her child. And this $6,000 or whatever it is could help get her to where she's only working 2 jobs instead of 3. That's a real life situation. And that's a situation that helped her child. So I encourage you to get outside of Atlanta and go out there and see what's out there, and get out from your computer screen and all these little reports and stuff that you type up. Get out there and see the real world. Thank you.
Senator Albers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that this is not working. I'm curious how many families you've met with and all the studies you pulled back to take a broad sampling of parents throughout our state that you came up to this conclusion. Do you have that information available for us today to look at?
Senator, respectfully, I'm talking on a more systemic scale. I'm not talking about individual families who are participating in the program. I think looking at the report, we don't have meaningful data that's just disaggregated by race, socioeconomic status, gender, disability status about what this program is doing for children. So that's what I'm referring to.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to get at, and I think that's what Senator Brass probably better just articulated. There is no real data there, right? So when we come to a committee meeting, we expect people to talk in facts, not hyperbole. And in this case, that is just not true. And I live in the Metro Atlanta area. We have many, many of the best special needs schools in my area. And people come from all around, from all income levels, in order to get their kids the services that they cannot get, even though Fulton County's got one of the best public schools in the whole nation. So I would caution you before coming out and speaking a hyperbole that we talk about facts, because as Senator Brass just said, this is about real people. And to somehow say that someone lives in a community or has a certain income level and they wouldn't be just as passionate and just as capable to be a parent is about as wrong can be. No more questions.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, is it very difficult to get a ADHD diagnosis?
I'm not aware of that, sir.
Is it, normally do a parent have to take their child to a doctor or a psychologist to get a diagnosis, or can they do it other ways?
I don't have that information, Senator. I can receive that and send it over to you.
Well, I think sometimes to get a diagnosis of ADHD is very simple. You can go online and get a diagnosis and pay something as little as $149 to get an ADA diagnosis. So, and then you have the opportunity to go to, and this will give you the opportunity to go to any school you so desire. And I just know that people tend to exaggerate when they go online and put down any information they want to get a desired results. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You have no further questions, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to call, for the sake of time, because we've already had a meeting with a hearing on this, I'm going to go ahead and just call one last, and it's Virginia Galloway. And then we'll call the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to quickly tell a story, a real life story of a student that I know, because I have been on the school choice concept for many years. I think that we need to trust our parents more and our bureaucrats less for what's right for our own children. And this young man, his parents moved to the best school district in Atlanta. They chose that district because they were expecting a son. What they didn't know is that when he was born, he was autistic. And so they were able, through the special needs program, to get him into a school that worked for him. But I want to tell you what they went through first. They had to wait 1 solid year of that child screaming and being dragged into school that he did not want to go to, coming home every night, wrapping himself up in a fetal position and crying all afternoon until supper was served. And then finally they were able to get him the program that he needed. And when he had been in that program 3 days, he came home from school. He was visibly happier every day that he was there. The first day was a little rough, like it is for most kids, and especially autistic children. But on the 3rd day, he came home and he said, "Can I go back to school tomorrow?" And that was music to that parent's ears, and they could not afford the full tuition, and this program helped them. Anything we can do to help children like him, I think we need to do. It's not about systems. It should be about children. That's what education is about, the children's best. We need to respect parents. We need to decide if we're about conformity or if we're about student success. And I think the vote on this would kind of lay out that priority. Special needs parents and students have so many things going against them. I really appreciate anything the state of Georgia would do. Senator Gooch, I appreciate you bringing this bill forward, and Faith and Freedom Coalition, whom I represent, is fully in support of this bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know, but there's
Any questions?
Did she speak last time?
yeah, I mean,
Thank you. You have no questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
I mean, obviously it's up to you, but
I think they've already had that. All right, now I do apologize, but I think some of these have already spoken to the bill as well, but, is there any discussion on the committee, from the committee? What is your motion?
Motion do pass.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Something, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. To be real brief, Senator Jackson raised this. I showed a couple other committee members, but if you pull up, I think we were going to have some testimony on it, but we ran out of time. If you pull up ADHDonline.com, you can get a diagnosis for $149. It's just not that hard, folks, and that's what I've been trying to point out for 2 years. Thank you.
All right, I have a motion and a second.
Substitute motion, Mr. Chairman.
State
Substitute motion, Mr. Chairman.
your substitute motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move lay on the table.
We already have a motion and a second on the floor.
Substitute motion, lay on the table, take precedence, Mr. Chairman.
Do what?
It takes precedence.
Okay.
He didn't have a second.
Second.
Ah,
I have a second.
now he does.
All right, I have a substitute motion. All those in favor for the substitute motion, raise your hand. To the table. I have 3 votes. I have 4 votes. All those opposed to tabling, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that measure fails. Now back to the original. We had a motion and a second. All those in favor of let's see. Substitute Senate Bill 47, LC 4904422S. Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the measure passes 5 to 6. Thank you. Next bill, we'll go ahead and if you will present your next bill, which is Senate Bill 159, Senator Gooch.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. This is it's also a substitute LC 39293-5S. I offer this to you. Give you a little quick background. A lot of school systems around the country utilize what I would call non-traditional modes of transportation. They transport children in non-school buses. These are usually in smaller vehicles, 8 passengers or less. They're not shared ride per se type vehicles. And they're not big yellow school buses, 60 to 90 passengers like we see around Georgia. Georgia is the only state that does not allow this alternative mode of transportation. And so this bill presents that opportunity for us today to give that local option or that local school board the opportunity to look for ways to be more efficient while maintaining safety and looking after the taxpayers' dime. So I think this is a piece of legislation that most of us can agree on. It requires that the State Board of Education come up with minimum state requirements and standards around alternative school vehicles, including vehicle specifications. It defines those vehicles as a motor vehicle with a capacity of 8 persons or less, operated and marked for the transportation of school children to and from school activities. It gives local school boards the authority to establish additional requirements, full local control on how this program is run for their district. And it prohibits a school from using a Uber or a Lyft type transportation system. So no ride share programs would be authorized under this code section. Just real quick, my personal background on this, my parents both drove school buses, and they would often talk to me about the need to have to transport students out of county to other school systems, IEP students, special needs students, so forth and so on. And even today, I hear that from bus drivers all the time. Why do we need to take a 60-passenger or a 90-passenger school bus 30, 40, 50 miles away from the local school district to transport one child? Well, the problem is a lot of IEPs require those requirements to be, these students to be transported alone. But there's nothing in the law that allows them to use a smaller vehicle. School buses get 4 to 6 miles to the gallon, depending on the terrain and where you are. So this is an opportunity to save taxpayers money, but primarily to offer that local control and give these school districts a choice. The state board would be in control of the specifications in the program, and then the local boards would decide if they want to opt in or not. And again, we're the only state in the country that does not offer this. Yield for questions.
Senator Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Gooch.
Yes,
Would
ma'am.
this be a lead-in for the transporting of IEP and 504 students?
No, ma'am. Once you take the scholarship,
sounds like
you're
it.
no longer under the control of the local district. So this would actually save the IEP program, the 504 program would actually save the school districts from having to transport kids. So just the opposite, actually. So.
You know, I'm always suspicious.
Thank you for your question. I will say there are several people in the audience. If given the time, they would come up and testify in favor of this. One is a Gwinnett County Transportation Director. You know, Gwinnett County is the largest school system, I believe, in the state, and they are supportive of this program. And I think you'll talk to many other transportation directors in our public school systems that favor this legislation as well.
Senator Invertari.
So just briefly, Senator Gooch, thank you for bringing this forward. I know my counties, including Paulding County and Haralson County, support this bill also. They're transportation directors. Just one comment, and they gave me to pass along to you, I think relation more for the DOE in addressing maintenance schedules and safety standards as it relates to liability, just to make sure they're kind of at the same level. So I just want to make that call out.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Senator Jackson.
Thank you. Senator Gooch, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Does this bill, if it passes, does it allow local public transportations to contract with schools to move students around?
I think if they meet the requirements of the RFP that's set out by the State Department of Education and the public school system, then I don't see why they couldn't put in a bid for that service. If you're talking about like a local transit system, you know, it all depends on the needs of the school district and if they want to participate in that level or not.
All right, sir.
Could be a good use of taxpayers' funds too.
All right, well, you said you had somebody to speak to, but we only have one person signed up to speak to the bill. And
Okay.
so John Franklin,
I believe that
APS.
would be him. Yes, sir. He's Gwinnett County's transportation director.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is John Franklin, and I'm the Executive Director of Transportation for Atlanta Public Schools here in Atlanta. I also have the unique perspective of having been a director in Hillsborough County Schools in Tampa, Florida, where I regularly used alternative transportation every day for both students who are facing homelessness and also students with disabilities on specialized transportation. Just wanted to quickly lend my support to say that this is an incredibly helpful element for us to ensure student success every day. It helps us cut the gap on maintaining our transportation to help our students get to where they need to go. As Senator Gooch mentioned, we do transport across county lines and across district lines, and it's very helpful for us to have this availability. So thank you for allowing me to lend my support.
Thank you, sir.
I stand corrected. He was Atlanta Public Schools. I said Gwinnett County.
Okay.
They do support the program.
It happens. All right, any other questions? Senator Albers.
The appropriate time, I make a motion do pass, Mr. Chairman.
I have a motion and I have a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of substitute Senate Bill 159 LC 392935S, raise your hand. 1, 2. And it is unanimous.
Awesome.
I didn't call the vote on the other one. All those opposed? Okay.
We almost had it unanimous.
Almost had it.
I thought it was getting unanimously voted
Can we say it was almost unanimous in committee?
All right. Thank you, Senator Gooch.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
And next, we'll move on to Senate Bill 66. Senator Anavatar, if you would like to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you Senate Bill 66, working off Committee Sub LC 490423S. Simple bill, basically merging the Innovation Fund Foundation and the Georgia Foundation for Public Education. Background, the Georgia Foundation for Public Education was created in 2010 with a 501c3 arm attached in 2019. It has a mission to support public schools and Broadway in raising philanthropic money. Innovation Fund was created in 2013 as a 501c3 to raise money and award grants to schools and partners for innovative programs. Also attached was a 100% state tax credit that was added in 2017 that the IFF would manage, and this was created by former House Education Chairman Brooks Coleman. The purpose of this bill I bring you today, over the past few years, these two foundations have basically has very similar missions, trying to accomplish same goals. They've partnered on a few grants at the same time, and due to recruiting issues with board members, fundraising, and overcrowding as it relates to trying to raise money in this space, both groups have decided it'd be best to merge into one. The Georgia Foundation for Public Education already has a paid staff member, and that is where we believe is the best place to put this. So this bill would basically dissolve the IFF as of January 1, 2022. It transferred the ownership of the existing tax credit to GFPE on that same date. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are any questions from the committee?
Go over the changes between the substitute and the original, please, sir.
Yeah, I'll just go through real quick. Let's see here. So line 47 lets the Georgia Foundation for Public Education include innovation schools and any dissolution. Line 57 allows the board to be more than 15 people. With this merger, it can help to have more people. Line 98 allows a combined group to spend no more than 10% of costs for salaries. Line 115 through 151, basically it's taken from the old IFF section and moved to the tax credit for GFPE. 157 through 158, clarifying individual donor information is not public. 240 to 247, dissolution of the IFF, and Section 3 moves the tax credit to GFPE on 1/1/22.
Go back and talk about the dissolution, if you would. What is it we're dissolving? I could not follow that in the original bill.
Yes, Senator. So basically, we're dissolving the Innovation Fund Foundation as it's set up under the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, and we're taking its responsibilities and moving it under the Georgia Foundation for Public Education under the Department of Education.
The 10% limitation on salaries that are covered in here, underline 98, what does current law have?
So, which line, Senator?
98. Explain to me the impact of that portion.
Basically just says the state sir that no more than 10% of donations of any such nonprofit come from private sources or from the taxpayers.
Now we have private organizations now that handle these funds as well, do we not, under the tax credit?
I believe so.
Do they have the same limitations?
I believe so, sir.
Pardon?
No.
I think,
I don't know if Jacqueline or Paige from,
I really think that's a pretty high percentage, really, when you think about for salaries. Direct employee cost of the foundation, just for administration. I think we had a bill that, originally that bill, when it was first passed, it basically was a 10% handling charge, but now we've taken that down on percentages on the size of the donations.
okay.
I think it would make sense to do the same thing in this foundation.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead.
So currently, the Georgia Foundation for Public Education only takes a 5% admin fee total, and the Department of Education pays for the salary of the executive director, which is me. So the 10% is more than what we even take now, but would be helpful going forward if we're going to assume a second staff person.
Okay.
Just for handling funds, that's a pretty expensive cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the nonprofit world, I think 10 to 15% is usually pretty standard, and I think their foundation is following kind of the best practices of what most 501c3 foundations do across the state, or quite frankly, across the nation.
Just saying, we've got a different rule for the private operators on what they're limited to taking, and it's less than this, unless it's small donations. Large donations, it's incremental.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? I have no one signed up to speak to this bill. Senator Albers?
Change your mind.
I have a motion to pass from Senator Albers. I have a second, Senator Gooch. Any discussion? All those in favor of Senate Bill 60, substitute to Senate Bill 66, LC 490423S, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those opposed, like sign. 1, 2. And the bill passes. Okay, now, it is 4:30. I have Senate Bill 153 we have on the docket, and I have got a lot of people signed up to speak to that, and due to that we are running into other committee times, I'm going to not take any action with this bill today, and we will get it on the try to get it on the calendar for Wednesday, and we will take up the action there if there is any action to be taken. If there's anything else to add from the committee?
What time does this committee end? Is it 4:30 or 4:45?
3:30.
Okay.
4:30.
Got you.
All right, having no other business.